SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Hello, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. If you're a new listener, thank you from the bottom of my teacher's heart for being here. I know how valuable your time is, and I'm really honored that you're sharing it with me and my guests. And thanks to returning listeners as well. You keep this podcast going. All right, let's get to today's episode. My guests today are Andrew Senkowski and Nick Wolf. I have the pleasure of working with both of these gentlemen at SYS Education, and I'm excited for you to get to know them as well. Andrew is a former math educator who has worked in both brick and mortar and online schools over the past decade. He currently lives and works from Pennsylvania as the content editor manager for a national curriculum company, but he stays connected to online teaching as an instructional coach for SYS. He is passionate about decreasing math anxiety for students and figuring out ways to take math education to new heights in the virtual setting. I had the pleasure of co-teaching with Andrew at Frontier Charter Academy a few years ago. He's also been on the podcast before, so make sure to check out Season 1, Episode 9 later. Nick Wolf spent his career working in all aspects of K-12 education, both nonprofit and for-profit, from the local to national levels. Starting as a tech support agent at KIPP, New York, his role shifted to more of a platform manager. Eventually, he moved to the KIPP Foundation as head of the professional development platform for the KIPP National Network. After 8 years of being, as Nick puts it, KIPPtonized, he started at Alma, an upstart student information system, working directly with dozens of school districts across the country regarding implementation and practice. Nick is currently the Technology Systems Coordinator at SYS Education. These two offer rare insight into the workings of a high-quality online school and have actionable advice that all of us can take and use tomorrow with students. So, you ready? Let's learn something new. Nick Wolf and Andrew Senkowski, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I am really excited to speak with both of you. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. This is exciting.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us.
And Andrew, you're a return guest, so I guess double thanks for coming back for more torture here with with me. I am really looking forward to talking with you both and getting your unique perspectives on online education. But before we dive into all of that, when you do take time away from work and from screens, what are both of you up to? Andrew, let's start with you.
Well, I like to get outside with the dogs. Also like messing around with my synthesizer, playing music by myself, every once in a while adding to my birding life list and expanding my mind with a good book, I'd say.
Ooh, tell me about your birding life more. I'm intrigued.
Well, I cannot brag as other people can, but I have about 200 birds on my life list, 200 species, let's say, and trying to add more at this point.
How do you keep that list? Like, is it on Excel or do you have an app for it?
Google Sheets at this point, yes. Keeping track of when I saw the bird and where I saw the bird.
It's all about organization.
Oh, yes.
We'll come back to that, I'm sure.
Yes. Have you seen the movie A Big Year or The Big Year, something like that?
Oh, no. But I do want to. I remember seeing about that one.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's the only birding-themed movie that I'm aware of.
Yes.
The one out there, yes. The one that represents this birding culture.
It's like Steve Martin and Jack Black.
Yeah,
it's a good
Steve Martin,
cast.
Jack Black, Owen Wilson. Okay, 2011 for those of you who need the Wayback Machine there. But yeah, I recently saw that movie. It was really good. I thought of that. Nick, how about you? Are you birding as well, or are you up to other things?
I'm not a big birder, I'll be honest. I mean, I will admire a good bird when I see one, but I don't keep track of them. Although now I think I should.
Maybe you should.
Yeah, I do think the question's a little misleading because you're implying that I take time away from screens outside of work, and that's never been me. I'm an indoor kid who works from home, so it's really much more about am I working at my desk or am I playing video games at my desk or am I, reading a good book usually inside. But I do have a nice outdoor space now, so I do all the maintenance required with that. So that counts. That counts as outdoor time.
That totally counts. Not the most fun outdoor time, but it still counts.
No.
Oh gosh. Well, I'd like to start today with a big picture question. There is so much that goes on behind the scenes when creating a fully virtual classroom for students. Part of the goal of an online program is definitely to keep those things out of sight so that the user has this really streamlined, really pleasant experience with whatever platforms you're using, be they Canvas or Zoom or Google Classroom. Can you pull back that curtain a bit for us? What are some of the big picture activities you both are doing in the background? Andrew, thinking as a teacher creating content, and then Nick as an ed tech specialist that makes an online school or course just accessible and a successful experience for students and families. What are you each doing maybe week to week that kids don't necessarily see, but that makes the whole thing work and work well?
As a educator standpoint, I kind of like to think of it as if I'm recreating my own brick and mortar classroom each week. And so what you would do as a brick and mortar teacher is think about like what materials do I need to prepare for direct instruction, for student collaboration, formative assessments, and activities for extension and remediation on any given week. From my own experience, though, I don't think I ever found enough time to do that in a reasonable manner in brick and mortar. I just always felt like I was falling behind on that. In the virtual setting, though, I feel like I was able to utilize a lot of different online resources and like online educational platforms such as Canvas to build in all of those things that I wanted to do, like the direct instruction, collaboration, assessments, extension, remediation, in a way that it not only felt seamless to me, but seamless to the students. So really kind of that background stuff that happens week to week is I will build out the quote unquote lessons or the pedagogical plan for each week. So this may include planning out Google Slides or setting up something like Nearpod, which is more of a collaborative slideshow that you could use. And it's really like, how do I plan out the direct instruction that I have? So the live Zoom classes that I might have. So how do I use the Zoom tools such as just breakout rooms to get the students involved, and how do I build in engaging tools like whiteboard.fi or Desmos interactives? But then beyond that, it's also just planning out the asynchronous learning opportunities, because not all new learning should happen in those live classes, because a lot of times in online environments, you don't have that option to have online classes every single day, 45 minutes or however long you need. I'm working to figure out a meaningful balance between the synchronous live classwork in Zoom and the asynchronous learning that can be done beyond those platforms. So like, where can I provide videos, either it be self-created or from my Khan Academy to provide that instruction, or also just thinking about like maybe better setting myself up for utilizing the flipped classroom model. Can I provide videos, text, things like that to set the students up for coming into the live class already learning something, and then we test that learning out. So this really is just a lot of different learning about like what's the content of that week. And then from there, I really build out the roadmap for each week. And by roadmap, it's kind of like curating what the student should see in a really accessible manner. So this could be, in my own experience, what we would call starter pages. And this was like a great way. It was like a homepage for students. When they log into the course, they see this, and it curates all the materials from the Zoom links for live classes to their assignments, to their online resources, their online reading, etc. And so just getting that in a reasonable manner and set up in a way where it's day to day, spread out enough where I can pace out that learning that is meaningful to the students and just provides all of those different mini instructional opportunities for those students throughout the week, be it a reading option from CK12, a video option from Khan Academy, or my live classes. And then from there, just building the actual assignments and activities. So just trying to make them meaningful, engaging in whatever platform I'm working in, using things like the Google Education Suite. While this also can be a curse as well, because there's so many options online, I just try to figure out the best way to make them meaningful, engaging, and accessible to the students. And then, the final kind of thing I think about is just how to hold them accountable for their learning throughout the week. And so that is built into those assignments, but just figuring out what's the best way for them to show their learning? Is it screenshots of practice? Is there ungraded quiz/survey options to gauge how they're working? So it's really a lot of different things in the background to figure out week to week how to best get the content out to the students.
Nick, how about you on the tech end of things? What's going on in the background to curate that experience? You have teachers like Andrew creating and curating all of these resources and making pages and linking things and developing slide decks, all of that. What is your role in making sure that all runs smoothly for the user?
So from a tech perspective, making, online school and coursework accessible for students and teachers and staff and everyone who's going to be using these systems is all about preparation. We've seen it's very hard to turn on an online school in just a week's notice. Like, all schools are built on so many different systems at this point. There's the student information system, which houses all the student data, usually houses attendance and grading, but that system is almost always independent of the learning management system, where Andrew's going to be doing the majority of his work. And then that system's going to be almost always, there are always exceptions, but almost always completely different than the online tool for video conferencing, so be it Zoom or Google Meet. All of these platforms are totally different. They're usually not run by the same companies. And so getting them to talk to each other is really the core of what a tech team does in an online school. It's a little different for in person, but in order to maintain, equity of access for students. So, in order for a student to see the really cool Nearpod presentation that Andrew put together, the students all need to have a baseline level of technology that they have access to with internet access. They need to be able to log in and see that Nearpod account. They need to be able to get into Canvas and access it from there. They need to be able to, exist in the system. And all of those pieces all kind of tie together and talk to each other, often through different methods and different times that they sync to each other. And it really is not something you want to do on the fly. And often it's not something you can do on the fly. So a lot of our tech team and, our time is spent making sure these systems are working and, working smoothly. And then when we do have all of that working, we kind of start working on eliminating as many barriers to entry as possible. So in the tech world, this is called user friction, where anytime a user hits a barrier to what they're trying to accomplish, it slows them down and makes them less likely to accomplish that goal. And so this is everything from logging into systems. For example, one school that I've worked with has given every one of their students a Chromebook. So the student goes in, logs into their Chromebook, and they're taken to their learning management system. But then in some platforms, they would have to log into that again. So it's another login. Sometimes those, if the school's not really working on their tech end, those could be different passwords. So you're asking elementary school students to remember multiple passwords, clicking in, following kind of complex instructions in order to get to what should be pretty forward-facing content. And so a good tech team is working with staff to identify the friction points that students are running into, and teachers, of course, but primarily, at the end of the day, it's all about, are the students learning, and we have to do our best to make that happen. But to limit those friction points as much as possible, to just make it as smooth and seamless as you can really have in an online school, because you don't have that, in person, I can see you're not paying attention, why aren't you paying attention, Andrew, kind of thing. You're doing it online. A lot of it's going to be asynchronous. So all of your tools and platforms have to be basically working as seamlessly as possible with as few logins, as few clicks as possible. And that's honestly a surprising amount of what the tech team will be doing on a daily basis.
Well, and it's interesting because you don't always think of that coming from a teacher background myself as well. I don't always think so concretely about the different aspects that go into making the school work, like the student information system, the LMS, then the video conferencing, and how they all have to be easy to access and not have a ton of barriers. Or, I sort of take for granted the single sign-on with Google and how, yes, just use my Google account. Great, thank you. We're moving right along. And we as teachers sometimes might think like, oh yeah, that's convenient, that's nice. But if it doesn't have that, it's okay. But really, if it doesn't have that, it might not be so okay, because what if you're in middle school or high school and you have 5 teachers and they're all asking you to log into different systems or different tools? So that planning that the educators are doing behind the scenes, I can see the benefit of having educators coordinate with one another as well when they're planning lessons or they're planning units. Like, hey, are we going to use CK12, or are you using that and I'm using Newsela and you're using a bunch of Desmos stuff? Can I do that with my class? Those sorts of things. What systems require additional logons and which don't are going to create either more or less work for your tech team too, and for your students. And when you were talking about user friction, it made me think of universal design for learning, which is something Andrew alluded to, and how we're trying to design instruction so that there aren't those barriers for students in learning. And then we're also trying to design it in the system so that there aren't barriers to people actually accessing it in the first place. So there's a lot there. There's a lot to think about, and absolutely a ton that's going on behind the scenes to make a really good online school look and feel good as well to the students and parents.
One thing that is, kind of center to every tech agent's mind is basically that internet safety is such a big concern. Students really need to live inside like a walled garden legally. You have to filter what students can see on the internet. And so the more tools that people use, and all the tools online, they're all great. I love all of them. But, some of them are going to be less compliant than others. Some are going to be less accessible. And so, working with your tech team to figure out what tools work and going through probably a few steps and maybe even going over a few hurdles will make everything better in the long run too.
I can't agree with you more on that. I've talked with other guests previously about that as well. And I think of Alfonso Mendoza, who has My EdTech Life podcast, and talking about less is more. And then also that safety and security concern, and making sure that even though this might be the bright new shiny thing that you saw on Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers or wherever, okay, pause, let's do a system of checks and balances, kind of like, let's vet this. Is it worth it? And is it going to really accomplish what we need in a safe and secure manner? There's so much more to think about with every decision that an educator makes or the school makes. So I appreciate both of you kind of pulling back that veil and letting us see what's going on behind the scenes. We know some schools are building their in-house online programs or keeping what they had started back in the spring of 2020 and expanding on it. Many schools aren't sure how to staff these new to them online programs. And, depending on funding, they might not be able to afford to purchase too much in the way of platforms or new curriculum. From your experiences, both in the teaching side and the technology side, what are the must-haves for an online program to work? If a school is trying to make this work and they maybe don't have unlimited funds, what are the things that they need to prioritize? We'll start with Nick first on this one from the tech side.
I've worked with schools that have been implementing like a lot of new systems, and I will say the best way to be successful in implementing, if you're implementing online learning, or even if you're, opening an online school next year, all the successful schools I've ever worked with started with well-trained staff who are bought into the missions and goals of the school. This is staff who, are given plenty of trainings, might even be just a couple days of PD before launching, but it's high quality professional development. Then decide in like small groups or as a larger community of your educators what your goals are from the year and what you need to get there. So in order to really make all of that work, you can't be limited by the tools that you have. So I would recommend basically starting with a learning management system. I've used Canvas in the past. I've also used Blackboard. They're all great. They all do different things. So it's pretty important to have your kind of goals and how you're going to be accomplishing your teaching thought out enough that you can really evaluate these learning management systems. Good thing is they're not necessarily the cheapest, but they're certainly not the most expensive piece of software a school's going to be buying any given year. They're definitely more affordable than a lot of platforms, even more affordable than most likely your video conferencing software, which will end up being pretty expensive. The good side of that is a lot of these platforms and a lot of these transitions to online learning can be supplemented by grants, both state and federal, including the federal E-rate program, which is just a fabulous, fabulous program. I think for 2021, they have about $4 billion in additional school funding that go towards technical solutions. So not everything you're trying to do will be covered by like an E-rate style grant, but I would not let a lack of funding stop you from implementing an online learning system. Honestly, the most important factor of doing any of these programs is that you have to make sure you're following the various legal state and local requirements. So this is attendance tracking, which can be pretty difficult to manage in an online school environment. Data filtering, which we talked about a little bit, keeping the kids on filtered, managed internet access. These are all very doable items, but they do take foresight and planning, which your tech team should be working on while you and your staff kind of leverage your knowledge to build out goals and objectives for the year.
It's really refreshing to hear you say that instead of starting with the tech, to start with the ideas, to start with your goals, your mission, your vision. What is it you want to do? Okay, now find the tool that meets that need instead of just maybe bargain shopping and looking for what might be the best monetary deal, but isn't actually going to do you the best service to your goals and mission.
Yeah, I definitely think that I've seen a lot of schools that picked an option because it's the cheapest or were mandated to pick an option because it's the cheapest. And that is really not a recipe for success. You can work with anything. I've worked with a school that had a legacy system that could not be modified and wasn't going to change anytime soon. The teachers, because they were bought into what they were trying to accomplish from an educational standpoint, made it work. And I'm sure teachers have never heard before that they should just make it work, but that's often how it works. Changing big software suites to do a year over year goal is just very draining on a school. You don't want to change software platforms. You don't want to change methodologies too frequently because how are you going to measure that success? And all of that ties directly into technical projects as well. I don't know about you, but I would not want to learn more than 2 new platforms in a school year. Imagine having to, your school's like, okay, we're changing student information systems. Because of that, we also have to change learning management system. And our new learning management system doesn't support Zoom, so we're going to be using Google Meet, which you've never used before. And, we got a great deal on Google Apps, so we're also going to be switching over there since we're using Google Meet. So now, teachers, you have to learn 5 new platforms. I know contractually you're not going to come back until late August, but we're going to have a day of PD to get you set up on all of these 5 new platforms. That's not a recipe for success and something that forward planning should have resolved.
Absolutely. And Andrew, I'm sure you have some ideas about this as well.
Sure. And I'm really glad that Nick brought up what I would consider the human factor of all of this. It's not just the must-haves are these online resource tools that are out there. And like Natalie, you mentioned earlier, just like the shiny new thing, there's just the online resources. There's just always the shiny new thing out there. So, I really agree with the learning management system, super important. Understanding your resource and tools, really important. I would also add understanding the free online resources that are out there that you would suggest for your school to use, the open educational resources, understanding which ones are best suited for your goals and ones that work best and that seamlessly fit into whatever system you're working with as well. So because there is a lot of those out there. And so those are some of those must-haves, just kind of that basic knowledge backing that. And what I want to kind of discuss myself is like this idea is that steady, responsive, and flexible leadership is also a must-have. I think you lose track of that when it's just like, well, we're building an online school, we need the tools, but some of those tools are just in people as well. And so you need to develop that in those people. So I would really say a must-have for any development of online schools, or just even if you're an online school and you're shifting your systems, like you really need that leadership at the top that needs to be able to clearly communicate the expectation and goals of this program and really understand the importance of feedback cycles. And Nick was alluding to this as well. Like, how can you best evaluate how things are going? And how do you know when it's truly time to change course or make adjustments? And I mean, this is really a danger spot for online schools. Just that idea that there's so much out there, you want to just be like, all right, this is not working right now, so let's move to this. And I think some of that's because of, when a brick and mortar school adopts something, a lot of times they get this physical thing. They get a textbook and they have this attachment. It's like, well, we bought all of these materials, so like, let's give it the best shot we can because we already bought it. It's there. And so in online schools, there's less of an attachment and a feeling that you should really try to make it work. And so you really want to as leadership, make the best decisions you can at the start, and then really give those decisions the time to play out and gather the feedback data on their effectiveness. You really want to plan that out. Like, what does that look like? How long should we let things play out to really gauge effectiveness? And I would even say this from experience working for a big online school in Pennsylvania. We had this shift towards using non-corporate curriculum, building our own curriculum, building our own systems, things like that. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and leadership needs to understand that. And in this school, 2 years after that shift, they went right back to it because they couldn't handle the uncomfortability of it and just didn't give it that time to give that feedback cycle a true run through. And so beyond that, like up top leadership, I would say the school district really needs someone who can act as an expert on both technology and pedagogy. So you need that combined person. And honestly, I really feel like it should be a full-time person that can work to determine best practices, share out those best practices, keep their ear to the ground for the educators, and triage issues with the online program. And so it's really important to have that person because you have that person that's in between the technology and the actual teaching. So someone who has that experience and also has the trust of your educators that are teaching in the online program. So there's those levels of leadership. And I also feel like leadership must also really work to act as a multiplier and encourage the teachers to become leaders in this. So if you're just starting up an online program, encourage the teachers to really voice their experience, become involved as leaders of this online education in their respective areas, because the more ownership these teachers have, the more buy-in you get, and the more best practices spread out among this team. So it's leadership from the top, but it's also like building it from the ground up as well. So you really need that kind of human factor to making these schools work.
Absolutely. I think that combination of top down and bottom up empowerment is really important as well, so that you feel like you're supported from your admin and from those above you on the chain, but that also you as the educator, you have the authority and the power to make sound decisions for your own classroom, and that you're working together and learning from one another. I think that's spot on. I like how you both brought up that human factor, that everyone needs to be on board with the mission, the vision. Those things need to be clear. The goals for the year need to be clear. And it makes me think of Dr. Katie Novak, who does a lot of research on universal design for learning. And she has that phrase, firm goal, flexible means. So if everyone's clear on the firm goal, how you get there might look a little different, or you might take different paths, but we're all working towards that same end. And so that's really important. You two have such great ideas. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to hear some more of your brilliant ideas about online education. So stay tuned. What's the one thing all online schools and programs struggle with? Student engagement and the ability to truly personalize interventions. How do we solve those problems? With the use of Admin Dash, a brand new Canvas LTI tool from SYS Education. Admin Dash allows online teachers to see a risk assessment score that proactively identifies students who may need more specialized attention or intervention, and offers a communication log that provides an outlet for complete transparency among teachers, admin, students, and families. At just 99 cents per student per year, and with no minimum price and no fees, you can't afford to not use Admin Dash. For more information about Admin Dash, contact sales at syseducation.org and start connecting proactively with your online learners. Welcome back, listeners. I am speaking with Nick Wolf and Andrew Senkowski, both of SYS Education. Andrew Senkowski is a former high school math teacher and instructional coach, and Nick Wolf is our fantastic ed tech specialist. And they are here talking about ed tech and online teaching and curriculum building. So one of my last questions for you both is, if a teacher is moving from brick and mortar to remote teaching, or maybe has just made the switch to online teaching purposefully, they decided to do that, they might be seeking some advice on what to prioritize. They want to do well, but they know the rules of the school game are different now. We know brick and mortar and online schooling is just so different. They're two different jobs, I always say. So from each of your perspectives, what should that teacher prioritize and focus on getting really good at during their first year of genuine online teaching? Nick, I'll kick it over to you first.
Thank you. I would say the first year of online teaching should be spent focusing on the tools initially provided by the school and using those. There are a million resources out there that are free and great, and all of them are good. But during this transition year, I think focus on what the school is recommending and the options readily provided to you before you dive out into the wild of the internet to find more things. The school will likely have provided some documentation around their tools, basically being like, this is how we recommend using this. But also, I would look through additional sources for information about the tool. Your school is not going to be the only school using Nearpod, so do some Googling around best ways to use Nearpod. Things like that. I wouldn't look necessarily for replacement tools. I wouldn't look for supplemental material. I would stick around with what school is currently using, just so you kind of get a sense of where the baseline is. That being said, I would say my favorite piece of tech advice that I would give a new teacher to online learning, really honestly anyone in general. I've tried to get my parents to do this. It doesn't work. But when in doubt, just try everything. If you're trying to do something and it's not working, just keep clicking on things. You're not going to be able to break anything. If you have let's say you're downloading a piece of software that lets you record videos to upload to your online course. If it's not doing something that you want it to do, just keep going down menus, look for things that say anything remotely of what you're trying to do, and click it. Worst thing that happens is you'll record a 15-second, or in my case, a 15-minute video of you poking around at the computer because you forgot to turn it off. It's not going to break anything. Your computer's going to be fine. There's very little chance of damage, which I know as someone who's trained a lot of teachers in a lot of different technology, that is a fear. It's a fear that, if I click this, well, what if I accidentally delete all my grades? Or what if I unenroll the student from my class? Very unlikely to actually happen. And the benefit of losing your fear of clicking buttons far outweighs any short-term, oops, I deleted that paragraph I wrote. And if you still can't find it after clicking on everything that looks relevant, just go right to Google and type in a full sentence of what you're trying to do. No need to be fancy, just being like, okay, so I'm trying to submit my report card for Alma, the student information system. If I go into Google and type, how do I submit my report card in Alma? The first result is how you do it. Oddly enough, it's not what Alma wrote, it's what another school wrote, but it's still the right answer. And so don't be afraid to look, but also don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. Honestly, don't be afraid to ask for help is probably the best advice I think I could give any beginning teacher. Just don't be afraid to ask for help. Everyone's been there before you. Everyone's willing to help. Everyone knows what you're going through. Ask for help.
And Nick, I'm so glad you brought all of that up, because it's really, you have to treat yourself like a friend as just getting into online education. Really give yourself a lot of grace. Give yourself that grace period to test things out make mistakes and learn from them. And really, as Nick said, limit yourself to some extent. It is the wilds out there, as you said, Nick. Like, there are so many shiny things to mess around with or try to incorporate into your class, but really just try to master a few items at first, because then you have that opportunity. You could really start to even journal. If I am someone who does not journal things that much, but I would really suggest keeping a journal of how you implemented those like specific tools that year, your first year, and reflect on, what's going well, not going so well. And then you might also start to find areas where it's like, all right, well, this is like, I have this need, but I'm not hitting it with this tool. Where else can I go for this option? And so it allows you to have that reflection in what you're doing. So really build that in for yourself, and give yourself that grace. I think beyond that, one thing I really want to call out in your first year is, and especially if you're really new to online education, is there's this concern that there's no student accountability. And I really want to emphasize that you should not let this concept of student accountability really mess up your instruction and course creation. It is hard to let go that you must watch over your students' learning at all times. Just because you had that in-person experience with them, you got to see everything they're doing, you have to understand that you don't have that accountability, that face-to-face to watch over them. And so you have Zoom class still, possibly, or whatever, live conferencing tool you use, but there's so much you can't see. And so some teachers may have that tendency to build a graded quiz for every day of the week. Just like a 3-point quiz here just to hold them accountable for their learning for each day. And the thing about that is it can be used well at times, but I don't suggest it, because you are building these quizzes yourself. You'll surely find yourself overwhelmed in creating and possibly grading these. And your students may feel overwhelmed as well if you're just constantly checking in with them, holding them accountable with these types of assignments. And so I really suggest to find a variety of ways to track student progress over a given week that does not involve constant assessment, or at least what you think of as typical assessment. So let's say, you're having students do asynchronous work on a given day. Ask them to post their thoughts on a discussion board in your learning management system, or complete a quick open-ended, ungraded survey about what they learned. These are ways you can track student learning and hold them accountable without putting them on trial each day. And so, you still need to assess their learning for a given week. So these kind of what you think of as standard assessments, and give them a grade for that. So think about how you would best do that. Could it be virtual exit tickets after live classes, or just setting up like 1 to 2 grade assignments per week to cover your learning targets? So it's really just this idea of how are you going to hold the students accountable without overwhelming them and yourself, while also still assessing their learning and being able to be a responsive educator. So just really keep that in mind in your first year. Don't overwhelm yourself and the students.
I think that's really good advice from both of you. I'm picturing sort of a survival guide in my head now, like how to survive or how to even thrive as your first year of an online educator, and really excellent advice from both of you, focusing on what your school is providing and just get good at that. Trying everything. And as Fons Mendoza would say, Nick, just get clicky with it. So you could steal that phrase. Just click on the things. You're not going to break it. And then also don't be afraid to ask for help. And like Andrew said, treat yourself like a friend, because you have to give yourself that grace and permission to mess up and permission to not know things, and get help from others as well. And that finally redefining what we think accountability looks like. It's a whole new world. And like you said, Andrew, you're not going to be able to keep up with that kind of grading if you're looking at every assignment, every day, every week. What is it that you really need to see? What information are you really seeking from your students? How can you be responsive without overwhelming either one of you? So those are really good pieces of advice, and I think excellent parts of the system for new teachers to focus on to be successful. I've really appreciated our time today. I do have one last question for the two of you. I am asking all of my guests this season, who was your favorite teacher as a kid? and why. I love sharing the legacies of educators from the past and how they're influencing the educators of today. So, Andrew and then Nick, who were your favorite teachers growing up?
Well, I would say this question is actually kind of hard for me because I wasn't really super reflective as a student when I was younger. So I didn't reflect back like, all right, what worked well and what not. And so I've learned that type of thing becoming an educator. But I think looking back, I would say one of my high school math teachers. So he ended up being my 9th grade and 12th grade math teacher, Mr. Brenneman at Hempfield High School, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Just a shout out there. What Mr. Brenneman did for me, though, is it's kind of hard to describe because it's hard to describe his teaching style, like from my memory, but it was his ability to challenge me that made him my favorite teacher. Coming into high school, I really did not feel like a quote unquote math person growing up. I would dread what we would call at my Catholic school upbringing math maintenance quizzes. And these were just kind of like drill quizzes, and I just like hated it.
They sound terrible.
Oh, yeah. It just did not make me feel like I was a good student at math. But once I hit 9th grade, Mr. Brenneman's teaching just like resonated with me better. He just was able to communicate better the thought processes behind things, not just kind of the roteness of math. And I think the biggest thing, though, that he did for me was to pull me aside and say, I think you need to take calculus. And this was not a 9th grade me who didn't think I was good at math. I was like, what is this calculus? Like, that seemed like it was the biggest math you could ever take. But what that told me was you can rise to the challenge of taking extra math in high school, extra math, not just like your standard, 1 a year, to reach this like high level. And what I really just took from that was like someone believed in me, and I went for it and worked my math. I did blocked periods to get all the way to calculus my senior year. And then, I graduated from Penn State University with a just straight math degree at that point. I just kept it going. So I really think that push to just say, hey, I believe in you, I think you can do this, was all that it took for me to make him my favorite math teacher.
That's so awesome, because I, as your co-teacher in the past, have witnessed you do really similar things for other students as well, helping to rewrite their math stories, really. Like Chase Orton talked about in one of our previous episodes, that sometimes we come into high school with these terrible math stories that we've written for ourselves and our teachers have helped us write. And when you get that educator who pushes you or believes in you or just gives you that confidence, that does resonate with you and that can change your whole trajectory. You went from thinking you're not good at math to teaching math and being really good at it, in fact. So that is awesome. Shout out to Mr. Brenneman. Nick, how about you?
It's funny you mentioned that. My favorite teacher is also math related, although he is a physics teacher, Mr. Frank Noskasi, which is such a great name for a teacher. Very, it's unfortunate how easy it is for nose cheese to be mentioned, so the spelling, but it's just a very good sense of humor. My high school, John Jay High School up in New York, had a joint class for AP Physics and Calculus. It was double period every day, just hardcore calculus and physics. And I took that class without having taken a previous step. So Mr. Noskasi was there to kind of guide me through it and kind of help me stay afloat, which ended up being fine. It was one of my favorite classes. But he was responsible for one of those moments in high school where it all just kind of fell together and started making sense. So we were doing, spent half the year doing physics problems, and his method of teaching was awesome because he did a lot of labs. He loved labs. He loved us watching, curves and arcs, and just so we get a sense of what the formulas mean and what they look like in real life. But the moment when we were doing like derivatives and there was an example, and I'm like, wait, I'm going to get this wrong, so please forgive me. I don't do math anymore. But it's like, wait, that equation for force is the same thing as this other equation, but if you did do a derivative of it. And he's like, yes, they're all related. And he just goes on the board and he writes, 10 formulas on the board and does a little bit of math, and suddenly he has 10 different formulas that we had spent all year working on. And it's that moment of everything coming together that is so rare to have in your life, where everything just kind of clicks in place. And you're like, oh, oh, wait a second. So that means this, and then this over here. All of it's together. And I've never had a teacher who'd been able to pull that kind of realization together. I will give out a small shout out to another teacher there, Mr. Saloon. I ended up taking history in college, but he taught me what a history class is going to be like in college. Sit in a big circle, talk about a reading, and then argue for the remainder of the period. And he was not my favorite because he was scary and intimidating, like college professors are. But he was, it was a good experience as well. But Mr. Noskazy, comforting, nurturing, great guy. I actually was doing a little bit of research on him after thinking about this question, and he has a TEDx video about teaching. He's very active. It's great. I followed him on Twitter, and he followed me back, so now I owe him a message, which I have not done yet. But yeah, he also wrote my college application recommendation, which I had forgotten until I found it in my files. It was very sweet. But yes, Mr. Noskazy for sure.
That's awesome.
Oh, now I need to find Mr. Brenneman on Twitter as well.
There you go. You got to shout out at you got to tweet at your your most influential educators of days ago. That is so cool. What awesome stories. I feel so inspired and uplifted by both of those. Nick and Andrew, thank you very much for your time today, for your thoughtful reflections on all of these questions that schools and districts are going to continue to grapple with in the coming years. If educators or administrators want to reach out to you, have questions for you, or just want to connect with you, where can they find each of you?
I'm on Twitter, as I mentioned, finding Mr. Noskazy. Nick C. Wolf, C as in Craig, which is my middle name. Please don't steal my identity. Or you can email me at nwolf, wolf like the animal, at syseducation.org.
And we'll just say, I guess we'll say I am a social media minimalist, and we'll go with saying my SYS Education email. And so you can reach out to me at Senkowski at syseducation.org. And that is ASENKOWSKI, just in case you need the Polish spelling.
Excellent. Thanks to both of you. Really appreciate your time today, and thanks for a great conversation.
My pleasure. This was great.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guests today, Andrew Senkowski and Nick Wolf. Andrew and Nick taught us that there's a lot that must be pre-planned and intentionally designed in the background for an online school or program to function really well for students and families. They helped us understand that it's okay to use fewer apps and use them really well, and that we should treat ourselves like a best friend and be kind to ourselves as we learn to take risks in the online world. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. Also, if you haven't before, head over to aoepodcast.org and enter your info at the bottom of the page to start receiving the AOE newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter from me to you with an episode-related thought or two to inspire and encourage you. Want to connect? On Twitter, you can follow me, Natalie Conway, at AOE Natalie, and the show at SYS Presents. I love hearing from you. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS Education and our products and services, head to syseducation.org. Lastly, this podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including our sound engineer, Natalie Farrell, graphic designer and social media and website manager, Lexi Boren, and producer, Bo Neal. Thanks for listening, and remember, we can learn new things.
Thanks for listening.